Hi guys. Sorry, let me turn myself up a little bit. I've moved my microphone from when it usually is, so I might just move it back for now. Because I noticed when I play games with my keyboard it's quite loud. And I felt bad about that, so I decided to move my mic, but now I'll just move it back. Hi guys. Hi. How are we doing today? I'm honestly a little bit low energy today, which I sort of saw coming, so perfect for an ASMR. Let me just double check everything over my model is okay. My model seems a little stiff. How's that, guys? That seems better, I think. Yeah. A little more smiley. Letters from a stoic Seneca? What's that? Well, hi, Sync. Welcome to stream. Hello. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure we were on chapter 6. Yeah, ASMR stream. Yeah. Let me just double check in my book. Oh, we're on chapter 7 now. Okay, let me just really quickly change that. Okay, there we go. So, yeah, we haven't read Rebecca for a while actually, have we? I feel like I should do these streams more often, but I just, I tend to neglect them, and I feel kind of bad about it. I really do, because I do really like doing these streams. I think they're really relaxing for me and for you guys as well. And yeah, I feel bad about it. So I want to do them more often, yeah. And I'm also really enjoying this book, and I hope you guys are as well. Yeah. My hands are a little bit cold, so I'm gonna warm them up really quickly. Because I'm gonna be holding a book for a while, so I won't have much time to be able to just, you know, keep my hands warm. Because yeah, but I don't know, like, I think my crater is just like, I know it's, you know, outside to the elements, but like, when it's hot, and when it's cold, it's really cold. Like, come on, I should get like some proper heating in here, or like an aircon or something. Honestly. Yeah. So, I think we can get right on it. Did you guys hear that? Lovely book. So let me just take out my bookmark. There we go. So, I can see myself now, unsuitably dressed as usual, although a bride of 7 weeks, in a tan-coloured stockinette frock. A small fur known as a stone marten round my neck, and over all a shapeless mackintosh, far too big for me, and dragging to my ankles. It was, I thought, a gesture to the weather, and the length added inches to my height. I clutched a pair of gauntlet gloves in my hands, and carried a large leather handbag. "This is the London rain," said Maxim, when we left. "You wait, the sun will be shining for you when we come to Manderly." And he was right, for the clouds left us as Exeter. They rolled away behind us, leaving a great blue sky above our heads and a white road in front of us. I was glad to see the sun, for in superstitious fashion I looked upon rain as an omen of ill will, and the leaden skies of London had made me silent. "Feeling better?" said Maxim, and I smiled at him, taking his hand, thinking how easy it was for him, going to his own home, wandering into the hall, picking up letters, ringing a bell for tea, and I wondered how much he guessed of my nervousness, and whether his question, "Feeling better?" meant that he understood. Never mind. We'll soon be there. I expect you want your tea. Oh, very comfy. Thank you. I hope you're liking it so far. He said, and let go of my hand because we had reached a bend in the road and must slow down. I knew then that he had mistaken my silence for fatigue, and it had not occurred to him I dreaded his arrival at Manderly as much as I had longed for it in theory. Another moment was upon me, and I wished it was delayed. I wanted to draw up at some wayside inn and stay there, in a coffee room by an impersonal fire. I wanted to be a traveller, on the road, a bride in love with her husband, not myself coming to Manderly for the first time, the wife of Maxim de Winter. We passed many friendly villages where the cottage windows had a kindly air. A woman, holding a baby in her arms, smiled at me from the doorway, while a man clanked across the road to a well, carrying a pail. I wish we could have been one with them, perhaps their neighbours, and that Maxim could lean over a cottage gate in the evenings, smoking a pipe, proud of a very tall hollyhock he had grown himself, while I bustled in my kitchen, clean as a pin, laying the table for supper. There would be an alarm clock on the dresser ticking loudly, and a row of shining plates. While after supper, Maxim would read his paper, boots on the fender, and I reached for a great pile of mending in the dresser drawer. Surely it would be peaceful and steady, that way of living. And easier, too, demanding no set standard. "Only 2 miles further," said Maxim. "You see that great belt of trees on the brow of the hill there, sloping to the valley with a scrap of sea beyond? That's Manderly. In there. Those are the woods." Just got here, but I do very much enjoy this because I've got to go follow you on Twitter, and everyone should, because of how awesome you are. Thank you, Echo. That's right, plug my Twitter. Kyoka Xiavon. Follow me. I forced a smile and did not answer him, aware now of a stab of panic, an uneasy sickness that could not be controlled. Gone was my glad excitement, vanished my happy pride. I was like a child brought to her first school, or a little untrained maid who had never left home before, seeking a situation. Any measure of self-possession I had gained hitherto during my brief 7 weeks of marriage was like a rag now, fluttering before the wind. It seemed to me that even the most elementary knowledge of behaviour was unknown to me now. I should not know my right hand from my left, whether to stand or sit, what spoons and forks to use at dinner. "I should shed that mackintosh," he said, glancing down at me. "It has not rained down here at all, and put your funny little fur straight. Poor lamb, I have bustled you down here like this, and you probably ought to have brought a lot of clothes in London." "It doesn't matter to me, as long as you don't mind," I said. "Most women think of nothing but clothes," he said, absently, and turning a corner we came to a crossroad, in the beginning of a high wall. Agree, hype up, Kyoka. Let's go. "Here we are," he said, a new note of excitement in his voice, and I gripped the leather seat of the chair with my 2 hands. The road curved, and before us, on the left, were 2 high iron gates beside a lodge, open wide to the long drive beyond. As we drove through, I saw faces peering through the dark windows of the lodge. Open wide? Oh, no. Okay. And a child ran round from the back, staring curiously. I shrank back against the seat, my heart beating quickly, knowing why the faces were at the window, and why the child stared. They wanted to see what I was like. I could imagine them now, talking excitedly, laughing in the little kitchen. "Only caught sight of the top of her hat," they would say. "She wouldn't show her face. Oh well, we'll know by tomorrow. Word will come from the house." Perhaps he guessed something of my shyness at last, for he took my hand and kissed it, and laughed a little, even as he spoke. "You mustn't mind if there's a certain amount of curiosity," he said. "Everyone will want to know what you are like. They have probably talked of nothing else for weeks. You've only got to be yourself, and they will all adore you. And you don't have to worry about the house. Mrs. Danvers does everything. Just leave it all to her. She'll be stiff with you at first, I dare say. She's an extraordinary character, but she mustn't let it worry you. It's just her manners. See those shrubs? It's like a blue wall along here, when the hydrangeas are in bloom." I did not answer him, for I was thinking of that self, who long ago bought a picture postcard in a village shop, and came out into the bright sunlight, twisting it in her hands, pleased with her purchase, thinking, This will do for my album. Manderly. What a lovely name. And now I belonged here. This was my home. I would write letters to people saying, "We shall be down at Manderly all the summer. You must come and see us." And I would walk along this drive, strange and unfamiliar to me now, with perfect knowledge, conscious of every twist and turn, marking and approving where the gardeners had worked. Here, a cutting back of the shrubs. There, a lopping off a branch. Calling at the lodge by the iron gates on some friendly errand, saying, "Well, how's the leg today?" While the old woman, curious no longer, bade me welcome into her kitchen. I envied Maxim, careless and at ease, and the little smile on his lips which meant he was happy to be coming home. It seemed remote to me, and far too distant, the time when I too should smile and be at ease, and I wished it could come quickly, that I could be old, even with grey hair and slow of step, having lived here many years, anything but the timid, foolish creature I felt myself to be. The gate had shut to with a crash behind us. The dusty high road was out of sight, and I became aware that this was not the drive I had imagined would be Manderly's. This was not a broad and spacious thing of gravel, flanked with neat turf at either side, kept smooth with a rake and brush. This drive twisted and turned as a serpent, scarce wider in places than a path, and above our heads was a great colonnade of trees, whose branches nodded and intermingled with one another, making an archway for us, like the roof of a church. Even the midday sun would not penetrate the interlacing of those green leaves. They were too thickly entwined, one with another, and only little flickering patches of warm light would come in intermittent waves to dabble the drive with gold. It was very silent, very still. On the high road there had been a gay west wind blowing in my face, making the grass on the hedges dance in unison, but here there was no wind. Even the engine of the car had taken a new note, throbbing low, quieter than before. As the drive descended to the valleys, through the trees came in upon us, great beeches with lovely smooth white stems, lifting their myriad branches to one another, and other trees I could not name, coming close, so close that I could touch them with my hands. On we went, over a little bridge that spanned the narrow stream, and still this drive that was no drive twisted and turned like an enchanted ribbon through the dark and silent woods, penetrating even deeper to the very heart, surely, of the forest itself. And still there was no clearing, no space to hold a house. The length of it began to nag at my nerves. It must be this turn, I thought, or round that further bend. But as I leant forward in my seat, I was forever disappointed, for there was no house, no field, no broad and friendly garden, nothing but the silence and deep woods. The lodge gates were a memory, and the high road something belonging to another time, another world. Suddenly, I saw a clearing in the dark drive ahead, and a patch of sky, and in a moment the dark trees had thinned, the nameless shrubs had disappeared, and on either side of us was a wall of colour, blood red, reaching far above our heads. We were amongst the rhododendrons. There was something bewildering, even shocking, about the suddenness of their discovery. The woods had not prepared me for them. They startled me with their crimson faces, massed one upon the other in incredible profusion, showing no leaf, no twig, nothing but the sulphurous red, luscious and fantastic, unlike any rhododendron plant I had seen before. I glanced at Maxim. He was smiling. "Like them?" he said. I told him, yes, a little breathlessly, uncertain whether I was speaking the truth or not, for to me a rhododendron was a homely, domestic thing, strictly conventional, mauve, oh god, I forgot to say that, mauve or pink in colour, standing one beside the other in a neat round bed, and these were monsters rearing to the sky, massed like a battalion. Too beautiful, I thought, too powerful. They were not plants at all. We were not far from the house now. I saw the drive broaden to the sweep I had expected, and with the blood-red wall still flanking us on either side, we turned the last corner, and so came to Manderly. Yes, there it was. The Manderly. I had expected that Manderly of my picture postcard long ago, a thing of grace and beauty, exquisite and faultless, lovelier even than I had most ever dreamed, built in its hollow of smooth grassland and mossy lawns, the terraces sloping to the garden, and the gardens to the sea. As we drove up to the wide stone steps and stopped before the open door, I saw through one of the mullioned windows that the hall was full of people, and I heard Maxim swear under his breath. "Damn that woman," he said. "She knows perfectly well I did not want this sort of thing," and he put on the brakes with a jerk. What's the matter?" I said. "Who are all those people?" "I'm afraid you will have to face it now," he said in irritation. "Mrs. Danvers has collected the whole damned staff in the house and on the estate to welcome us. It's all right. You won't have to say anything. I'll do it all." I fumbled for the handle of the door, feeling slightly sick and cold now too from the long drive, and as I fumbled with the catch, the butler came down the steps, followed by a footman, and he opened the door for me. He was old, he had a kind face, and I smiled up at him, holding out my hand, but I don't think he could have seen, for he took the rug instead, and my small dressing case, and turned to Maxim, helping me from the car at the same time. "Well, here we are, Firth," said Maxim, taking off his gloves. "It was raining when we left London. You don't seem to have had it here. Everyone well?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. No, we have had a dry month on the whole. Glad to see you home. I hope you have been keeping well, and Madam too." "Yes, we are both well, thank you, Firth. Rather tired from the drive and wanting our tea. I didn't expect this business." He jerked his head to the hall. "Sorry the Rat Army and I can't make it for the stream. I've got studying to do, but I hope you have a good stream." "Oh, it's okay, Marka. Thanks for popping in. Hopefully the studying goes well. Good luck." "Mrs. Danvers' orders, sir," said the man, his face expressionless. "I might have guessed it," says Maxim abruptly. "Come on," he turned to me. "It won't take long, and then you shall leave your tea." We went together up the flight of steps, Firth and the footman following with the rug and my mackintosh, and I was aware of a little pain at the pit of my stomach and a nervous contraction in my throat. I can close my eyes now and look back on it and see myself as I must have been, standing on the threshold of the house, a slim, awkward figure in my stockinette dress, clutching in my sticky hands a pair of gauntlet gloves. I can see the great stone hall, the wide doors open to the library, the Peter Lelys and the Van Dykes on the walls, the exquisite staircase leading to the minstrel's gallery, and there, ranged one behind the other in the hall, overflowing to the stone pastures beyond and to the dining room, a sea of faces, open-mouthed and curious, gazing at me as though I were the watching crowd, as though they were the watching crowd about the block, and I, the victim with my hands behind my back. Someone advanced from the sea of faces, someone tall and gaunt, dressed in deep black, whose prominent cheekbones and great hollow eyes gave her a skull's face, parchment white, set on a skeleton frame. She came towards me, and I held out my hand, envying her for her dignity and her composure, but when she took my hand, hers was limp and heavy, deathly cold, and it lay in mine like a lifeless thing. "This is Mrs. Danvers," said Maxim, as she began to speak, still leaving that dead hand in mine, her hollow eyes never leaving my eyes, so that my own wavered and would not meet hers, and as they did so, her hand moved in mine, the life returned to it, and I was aware of a sensation of discomfort and of shame. I cannot remember her words now, but I know that she bade me welcome to Manderly in the name of herself and the staff, a stiff, conventional speech rehearsed for the occasion, spoken in a voice as cold and lifeless as her hands had been. When she had finished, she waited, as though for a reply, and I remember blushing scarlet, stammering some sort of thanks in return, and dropping both my gloves in the confusion. She stooped to pick them up, and as she handed them to me, I saw a little smile of scorn upon her lips, and I guessed at once that she considered me ill-bred. Something in the expression of her face gave me a feeling of unrest, and even when she had stepped back and taken her place amongst the rest, I could see that black figure standing out alone, individual, and apart. And for all her silence, I knew her eye to be upon me. Maxim took my arm and made me a little speech of thanks, perfectly easy and free from embarrassment, as though the making of it was no effort to him at all, and then he bore me off to the library to tea, closing the doors behind us, and we were alone again. 2 cocker spaniels came from the fireside to greet us. They pawed at Maxim, their long silken ears strained back with affection, their nose questing his hands, and then they left him and came to me, sniffing at my heels, rather uncertain, rather suspicious. One was the mother, blind in one eye, and soon she had enough of me and took herself with a grunt to the fire again. But Jasper, the younger, put his nose into my hand and laid a chin upon my knee, his eyes deep with meaning, his tail a thump, when I stroked his silken ears. I felt better than when I had taken my hat off and my wretched little fur, and thrown them both beside my gloves and my bag onto the window seat. It was a deep, comfortable room, with books lining the walls to the ceiling, the sort of room a man would move from never, did he live alone. Solid chairs beside a great open fireplace, baskets for the 2 dogs in which I felt they never sat, for the hollows in the chairs had telltale marks. The long windows looked out upon the lawns, and beyond the lawn to the distant shimmer of the sea. There was an old quiet smell about the room, as though the air in it was a little changed, for all the sweet lilac scent and the roses brought to it throughout the early summer. Whatever air came to this room, whether from the garden or from the sea, would lose its first freshness, becoming part of the unchanging room itself, one with the books, musty and never read, one with the scrolled ceiling, the dark panelling, the heavy curtains. It was an ancient mossy smell, the smell of a silent church where services are seldom held, where rusty lichen grows upon the stones and ivy tendrils creep to the very windows. A room for peace, a room for meditation. Soon tea was brought to us, a stately little performance enacted by Firth and the young footman, in which I played no part until they had gone, and while Maxim glanced through his great pile of letters, I played with 2 dripping crumpets, crumpled cake with my hands, and swallowed my scalding tea. Now and again he looked up at me and smiled, and then returned to his letters, the accumulation of the last months, I supposed, and I thought how little I knew of his life here at Manderly, of how it went day by day, of the people he knew, of his friends, men and women, of what bills he paid, what orders he gave about his household. The last weeks have gone so swiftly, and I, driving by his side through France and Italy, thought only of how I loved him, seeing Venice with his eyes, echoing his words, asking no questions of the past and future, content of the little glory of the living present. For he was gayer than I had thought, more tender than I had dreamed, youthful and ardent in 100 happy ways, not the Maxim I had first met, not the stranger who sat alone at the table in the restaurant, staring before him, wrapped in his secret self. My Maxim laughed and sang, threw stones into the water, took my hand, wore no frown between his eyes, carried no burden on his shoulder. I knew him as a lover, as a friend, and during those weeks I had forgotten that he had a life, orderly, methodical, a life which must be taken up again, continued as before, making vanished weeks a brief, discarded holiday. I watched him read his letters now. I saw him frown at one, smile at another, dismiss the next with no expression, and, but for the grace of God, I thought my letter would be lying there, written from New York, and he would read it all the same indifferent fashion, puzzled at first perhaps by the signature, and then tossing it with a yawn into the pile of others in the basket, reaching for his cup of tea. The knowledge of this chilled me. How narrow a chance had stood between me and what might have been, for he would have sat there to his tea as he sat now, continuing his home life as he would in any case, and perhaps he would not have thought of me much, not with regret anyway, while I, in New York, playing bridge with Mrs. Van Hopper, would wait day after day for a letter that never came. I leant back into my chair, glancing about the room, trying to instill into myself some measure of confidence, some genuine realization that I was here, at Manderly, the house of the picture postcard, the Manderly that was famous. I had to teach myself that this was all mine now, mine as much as his. The deep chair I was sitting in, that mass of books stretching to the ceiling, the pictures on the walls, the gardens, the woods, the Manderly I had read all about. All of this was mine now, all because I married Maxim. We should grow old here together. We should sit like this to our tea as old people, Maxim and I, with other dogs, the successors of these, and the library would wear the same ancient musty smell that it did now. It would know a period of glorious shabbiness, and where, when the boys were young, our boys, for I saw them sprawling on the sofa, with muddy boots, bringing with them always a little of rods and cricket bats, great clasp knives, bows and arrows. On the table there, polished now and plain, an ugly case would stand, containing butterflies and moths, and another one with birds' eggs wrapped in cotton wool. Not all this junk in here, I would say. Take them to the schoolroom, darlings. And they would run off, shouting, calling to one another, but the little one staying behind, pottering on his own, quieter than the others. My vision was disturbed by the opening of the door, and Firth came in with the footman to clear the tea. "Mrs. Danvers wondered, madam, whether you would like to see your room," he said to me, when the tea had been taken away. Maxim glanced up from his letters. "What sort of job have they made of the east wing?" he said. "Very nice indeed, sir. It seems to me the men made a mess when they were working, of course, and for a time Mrs. Danvers was rather afraid it would not be finished by your return. But they cleared out last Monday. I should imagine you would be very comfortable there, sir. It's a lot lighter, of course, on that side of the house." "Have you been making altercations?" I asked. "Oh, nothing much," said Maxim briefly. "Only redecorating and painting the suite on the east wing, which I thought we would use for ours. As Firth says, it's much more cheerful on that side of the house, and it has a lovely view of the rose garden. It was the visitors' ring when my mother was alive. I'll just finish these letters and then I'll come up and join you. Run along and make friends with Mrs. Danvers. It's a good opportunity." I got up, slowly. Sorry. Oh my god, my mother went crazy. I got up slowly, my old nervousness returning, and went out into the hall. I wished I could have waited for him, and then taking his arm, seen the room together. I did not want to go alone with Mrs. Danvers. How vast the great hall looked now that it was empty. My feet rang on the flagged stones, echoing to the ceiling, and I felt guilty at the sound, as one does in the church, self-conscious, aware of the same constraint. My feet made a stupid pitter-patter as I walked, and I thought that Firth, with his felt soles, must have thought me foolish. "It's very big, isn't it?" I said, too brightly, too forced, a schoolgirl still, but he'd answered me in all solemnity. "Yes, madam, Manderly is a big place. Not so big as some, of course, but big enough. This was the old banqueting hall. In old days, it is used still on great occasions, such as a big dinner or ball, and the public are admitted here, you know, once a week." "Yes," I said, still aware of my loud footsteps, feeling as I followed him that he considered me as he would one of the public visitors, and I behaved like a visitor too, glancing politely to right and left, taking in the weapons on the wall and the pictures, touching the carved staircase with my hands. A black figure stood waiting for me at the head of the stairs. The hollow eyes watched me intently from the white skull's face. I looked round for the solid Firth, but he had passed along the hall and into the further corridor. I was alone now with Mrs. Danvers. I went up the great stairs towards her, and she waited, motionless, her hands folded before her, her eyes never leaving my face. I summoned a smile, which was not returned. Nor did I blame her, for there was no purpose to the smile. It was a silly thing, bright and artificial. I hope I haven't kept you waiting, I said. It's for you to make your own time, madam, she answered. I'm here to carry out your orders. And then she turned through the archway of the gallery to the corridor beyond. We went along a broad carpeted passage and then turned left, through an oak door and down a narrow flight of stairs, and up a corresponding flight, and so to another door. This she flung open, standing aside to let me pass, and I came to a little anteroom or boudoir, furnished with a sofa, chairs, and writing desk, which opened out to a large double bedroom with wide windows and a bathroom beyond. I went at once to the window and looked out. The rose garden lay below, and the eastern part of the terrace, which beyond the rose garden rose a smooth grass bank, stretching to the near woods. You can't see the sea from here, then? You can't see the sea from here, then? I said, turning to Mrs. Danvers. No, not from this wing, she answered. You can't even hear it either. You would not know the sea was anywhere near from this wing. She spoke in a peculiar way, as though something lay behind her words, and she laid an emphasis on the words "this wing," as if suggesting that the suite where we stood now held some inferiority. I'm sorry about that. I like the sea, I said. She did not answer. She just went on staring at me, her hands folded before her. However, it is a very charming room, I said, and I'm sure I shall be comfortable. I understand that it's been done up for the return. Oh, for our return. Yes, she said. What was it like before? I asked. It had a mauve paper and different hangings. Mr. De Winter did not think it very cheerful. It was never much used except for occasional visitors. But Mr. De Winter gave special orders in his letters that you would have this room. Then this was not his bedroom originally, I said. No, madam, he's never used the room in his wing before. Oh, I said. He didn't tell me that. And I wandered to the dressing table and began combing my hair. My things were already unpacked, my brushes and comb upon the tray. I was glad Maxim had given me a set of brushes, and that they were laid out there upon the dressing table for Mrs. Danvers to see. They were new. They had cost money. I need not to be ashamed of them. Alice has unpacked for you, and will look after you until your maid arrives, said Mrs. Danvers. I smiled at her again. I put down the brush upon the dressing table. I don't have a maid, I said awkwardly. I'm sure Alice, if she is the housemaid, will look after me all right. She wore the same expression that she had done on our first meeting, when I dropped my gloves so cautiously on the floor. I'm afraid that would not have to do for very long, she said. As usual, you know, for ladies in your position to have a personal maid. I flushed and reached for my brush again. There was a sting in her words. I understood too well. If you think it necessary, perhaps you should see about it for me, I said, avoiding her eyes. Some young girl, perhaps, wanting to train? If you wish, she said. It's up to you to say. There was a silence between us. I wish she would just go away. I wondered why she must go on, standing there, watching me, her hands folded on her black dress. I suppose you've been at Manderly for many years, I said, making a fresh effort. Longer than anyone else? Not as long as Firth, she said, and I thought how lifeless her voice was, and cold like her hand when it had lain in mine. Firth was here when the old gentleman was living, when Mr. De Winter was a boy. I see, I said. So you did not come until after that? No, she said. Not till after that. Once more I glanced up at her, and once more I met her eyes, dark and sombre, in that white face of hers, instilling into me, I knew not why, a strange feeling of disquiet, of foreboding. I tried to smile, and could not. I found myself held by those eyes that had no light, no flicker or sympathy towards me. I came here when the first Mrs. De Winter was a bride, she said. and her voice, which had hitherto, as I said, been dull and toneless, was harsh now, with unexpected animation, with life and meaning, and there was a spot of colour on the gaunt cheekbones. The change was so sudden that I was shocked and a little scared. I did not know what to do, or what to say. It was as though she had spoken words that were forbidden, words that she had hidden within herself for a long time, and now would be repressed no longer. Still, her eyes never left my face. They looked upon me with a curious mixture of pity and of scorn, until I felt myself to be even younger and more untutored to the ways of life than I had believed. I could see she despised me, marking with all the snobbery of her class that I was no great lady, that I was humble, shy, and different. Yet there was something besides scorn in those eyes of hers, something surely of positive dislike, or actual malice. I had to say something. I could not go on sitting there, playing with my hairbrush, letting her see how much I feared and mistrusted her. Mrs. Danvers, I heard myself saying, I hope we shall be friends and come to understand one another. You must have patience with me, because this sort of life is new to me. I've lived rather differently, and I do want to make a success of it, and above all to make Mr. De Winter happy. I know I can leave all household arrangements to you. Mr. De Winter said so, and you must just run things as they have always been run. I shan't want to make any changes. I stopped, a little breathless, still uncertain of myself and whether I was saying the right thing, and when I looked up again, I saw that she had moved and was standing with her hand on the handle of the door. Very good, she said. I hope I shall do everything to your satisfaction. The house had been in my charge now for more than a year, and Mr. De Winter had never complained. It was very different, of course, when the late Mrs. De Winter was alive. There was a lot of entertaining then, a lot of parties, and though I managed for her, she liked to devise things herself. Once again, I had the impression that she chose her words with care, that she was feeling her way, as it were, into my mind, and watching for the effect upon my face. I would rather leave it to you, I repeated, much rather, and into her face came the same expression I noticed before, when I first had shaken hands with her in the hall, a look surely of derision, of definite contempt. She knew that I would never withstand her, and that I feared her too. Can I do anything more for you? She said, and pretended to glance around the room. No, I said. No, I think I have everything. I shall be very comfortable here. You have made the room so charming. This last a final crawling sob to win her approval. She shrugged her shoulders, and still she did not smile. I only followed out Mrs. De Winter's instructions, she said. She hesitated by the doorway, her hand on the handle of the open door. It was as though she still had something to say to me, and could not decide upon the words, yet waited there for me to give her opportunity. I wish she would go. She was like a shadow standing there, watching me, appraising me with her hollow eyes set in that dead skull's face. If you find anything not to your liking, you will tell me at once, she asked. Yes, I said. Yes, of course, Mrs. Danvers. But I knew this was not what she had meant to say, and silence fell between us once again. If Mr. De Winter asks for his big wardrobe, she said suddenly, you must tell him it was impossible to move. We tried, but we could not get it through those narrow doorways. These are smaller rooms than those in the west wing. If he doesn't like the arrangement of the suite, he must tell me. It was difficult to know how to furnish these rooms. Please don't worry, Mrs. Danvers, I said. I'm sure he will be pleased with everything. But I'm sorry it's given you so much trouble. I had no idea he was having rooms redecorated and furnished. He shouldn't have bothered. I'm sure I should have been just as happy and comfortable in the west wing. She looked at me curiously and began twisting the handle of the door. Mr. De Winter said you would prefer to be on this side, she said. The rooms in the west wing are very old. The bedroom in the big suite is twice as large as this. A very beautiful room, too, with a scrolled ceiling. The tapestry chairs are very valuable, and so is the carved mantelpiece. It's the most beautiful room in the house, and the windows look down across the lawns to the sea. I felt uncomfortable, a little shy. I did not know why she must speak with such an undercurrent of resentment, implying as she did at the same time that this room, where I found myself to be installed, was something inferior, not up to Manderly standard, a second-rate room, as it were, for a second-rate person. I suppose Mr. De Winter keeps the most beautiful room to show to the public. Oh, I suppose Mr. De Winter keeps the most beautiful room to show to the public, I said. She went on twisting the handle of the door, and then looked up at me again, watching my eyes, hesitating before replying, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter even, and more toneless than it had been before. The bedrooms are never shown to the public, she said. Only the hall and the gallery and the room below. She paused an instant, feeling me with her eyes. They used to live in the west wing, and used those rooms when Mrs. De Winter was alive. That big room I was telling you about that looked down to the sea was Mrs. De Winter's bedroom. Then I saw a shadow flit across her face, and she drew back against the wall, effecting herself, as a step sounded outside and Maxim came into the room. "How is it?" he said to me. "All right. Do you think you'll like it?" He looked around with enthusiasm, pleased as a schoolboy. "I always thought this was a most attractive room," he said. It was wasted all these years as a guest room, but I always thought it had possibilities. You've made a great success of it, Mrs. Danvers. I give you 4 marks. "Thank you, sir," she said, her face expressionless, and then she turned and went out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. "Gonna go get some sleep since I have a paper tomorrow. Bye." "Oh, bye, Echo. Thank you for joining. Good luck with your paper as well." Oh my god. You guys are all busy. Maxim went and leant out of the window. "I love the rose garden," he said. "One of the first things I remember is walking after my mother on very small and steady legs while she picked off the dead heads of the roses. There's something peaceful and happy about this room, and it's quiet too. You can never tell you were within 5 minutes of the sea from this room." "That's what Mrs. Danvers said," I told him. He came away from the window. He prowled about the room, touching things, looking at my pictures, opening wardrobes, fingering my clothes, already unpacked. How did you get on with old Danvers?" he said abruptly. I turned away and began combing my hair again before the looking glass. "She seems just a little bit stiff," I said after a moment or two. "Perhaps she thought I was going to interfere with the running of the house." I don't think she would mind you doing that," he said. I looked up and saw him watching my reflection in the looking glass. Then he turned away and went over to the window again, whistling quietly under his breath, rocking backwards and forwards on his heels. "Don't mind her," he said. "She is an extraordinary character in many ways, and possibly not very easy for another woman to get on with. You mustn't worry about it. If she really makes herself a nuisance, we'll get rid of her, for she's efficient, you know, and she will take all housekeeping worries off your hands. I dare say she's a bit of a bully to the staff. She doesn't dare bully me, though. I'd given her the sack long ago if she had tried." "I expect we shall get on very well when she knows me better," I said, quickly. "After all, it's natural enough that she would resent me a bit at first." "Resent you? Why resent you? What the devil do you mean?" he said. He turned from the window, frowning, an odd, half-angry expression on his face. I wondered why he should mind, and wished I had said nothing else. "I mean, it must be much easier for a housekeeper to look after a man alone," I said. "I dare say she had got into the way of doing it, and perhaps she was afraid I should be very overbearing." "Overbearing? Oh, my God," he began. "If you think—" And then he stopped and came across to me and kissed me on top of my head. "Let's forget about Mrs. Danvers," he said. "She doesn't interest me very much, I'm afraid. Come along and let me show you something of Manderly." I did not see Mrs. Danvers again that evening, and we did not talk about her any more. I felt happier when I had dismissed her from my thoughts, less of an interloper, and as we wandered about the rooms downstairs and looked at the pictures, and Maxim put his arm around my shoulder, I began to feel more like the self I wanted to become, the self I had pictured in my dreams, who made Manderly her home. footsteps no longer sounded foolish on the stone flags of the hall. Maxim's nailed shoes made far more noise than mine, and the pattering feet of the 2 dogs was a comfortable, pleasing note. I was glad too, because it was the first evening we had only been back a little while, and the showing of the picture had taken time. When Maxim, looking at the clock, said it was too late to change for dinner, so that I was spared the embarrassment of Alice, the maid, asking what I should wear, and of her helping me to dress, and myself walking down that long flight of stairs to the hall, cold, with bare shoulders, in a dress that Mrs. Van Hopper had given me because it did not suit her daughter. I had dreaded the formality of dinner in that austere dining room, and now because of the little fact that we had not changed, it was quite all right, quite easy, just the same as when we had dined together in restaurants. It was comfortable in my stockinette dress. I laughed and talked about the things we had seen in Italy and France. We even had the snapshots on the table, and Firth and the footmen were impersonal people, as the waiters had been. They did not stare at me as Mrs. Danvers had done. We sat in the library after dinner, and presently the curtains were drawn and more logs thrown into the fire. It was cool for May. I was thankful for the warmth that came from the steady burning logs. It was new for us to sit together like this. After dinner, for in Italy we had wandered about, walked or driven, gone into the little cafes, leant over bridges. Maxim made instinctively now for the chair on the left of the open fireplace, and stretched out his hand for the papers. He settled one on the broad cushion behind his head, and lit a cigarette. This is the routine, I thought. This is what he always does. This has been his custom now for years. He did not look at me. He went on reading his paper, contented, comfortable, having assumed this way of living, the master of the house. And as I sat there, brooding, my chin in my hands, fondling the soft ears of one of the spaniels, it came to me that I was not the first one to lounge there in possession of the chair. Someone had been there before me, and surely left an imprint of her person on the cushions, and on the arm where her hand had rested. Another one had poured the coffee from that same silver coffee pot, had placed the cup to her lips, had bent down to the dog, even as I was doing. Unconsciously I shivered as though someone had opened the door behind me and left a draught into the room. I was sitting in Rebecca's chair. I was leaning against Rebecca's cushion, and the dog had come to me and laid his head upon my knee because that had been his custom, and he remembered. In the past, she had given sugar to him there. Okay, that's the end of chapter 7. Quite a long one, but it had a lot to introduce, so it makes sense. How long is the next chapter? Not too bad, not as long. Okay, let me have a drinky, because I kind of regret not drinking before, because, oh my god, I had to take quite a few breaks while reading, because my mouth was getting really dry. I've got, sorry, I've got Coke again today, which I know isn't good, but it's okay. It's fine. So let's just change that to 8. There we go. Yeah. Like, I should probably have water more often, but, you know, this is just how it works, you know? Ooh. But yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying the story so far. I know that I definitely should do these streams more often, because I noticed that, especially for me, I find it really hard to remember like how far we got in, and then I'll be like, oh yeah. So I feel like I should do these probably like once a week or something like that, instead of like every 2-3 weeks. Yeah, I think we're ready for the next chapter. You guys ready? Enjoying the ASMR? Okay, so this is chapter 8. I had never realised, of course, the life at Manderly would be so orderly and planned. I remember now, looking back, how on that first morning, Maxim was up and dressed and writing letters even before breakfast, and when I got downstairs, rather after 9 o'clock, a little flurried by the booming summons of the gong, I found he had nearly finished. He was already peeling his fruit. He looked up at me and smiled. "You mustn't mind," he said. "This is something you will have to get used to. I've no time to hang about this hour of the day. Running a place like Manderly, you know, is a full-time job. The coffee and the hot dishes are on the sideboard. We always help ourselves at breakfast." I said something about my clock being slow, about having been too long in the bath, but he did not listen. He was looking down at a letter, frowning at something. How impressed I was, I remember well, impressed and a little overawed by the magnificence of the breakfast offered to us. There was tea, a great silver urn, and coffee too. And on the heater, piping hot, dishes of scrambled eggs, of bacon, and another of fish. There was a little clutch of boiled eggs as well, in their own special heater, and porridge in a silver porringer. On another sideboard was a ham and a great piece of old bacon. There were scones too, on the table, and toast with various pots of jam, marmalade, and honey, while dessert dishes, piled high with fruit, stood at either end. It seemed strange to me that Maxim, who in Italy and France had eaten a croissant and fruit only, and drunk a cup of coffee, should sit down to this breakfast at home, enough for a dozen people, day after day, probably, year after year, seeing nothing ridiculous about it, nothing wasteful. I noticed he had eaten a small piece of fish. I took a boiled egg, and I wondered what happened to the rest, all those scrambled eggs, a crisp bacon, the porridge, and the remains of the fish. Were there menials, I wondered, whom I should never know, never see, waiting behind kitchen doors for the gift of our breakfast, or was it all thrown away, shovelled into dustbins? I would never know, of course, and I would never dare to ask. "Thank the Lord I haven't a great crowd of relations to inflict upon you," said Maxim. "A sister I very rarely see, and a grandmother who is nearly blind. Beatrice, by the way, asks herself over to lunch. I half expected she would. I suppose she wants to have a look at you." "Today?" I said, my spirits sinking to 0. "Yes. According to the letter I got this morning, she won't stay long. You'll like her, I think. She's very direct, believes in speaking her mind, no humbug at all. If she doesn't like you, she'll tell you so to your face." I found this hardly comforting, and wondered if there was not some virtue in the quality of insincerity. Maxim got up from his chair and lit a cigarette. "I have a mass of things to see to this morning. Do you think you can amuse yourself?" he said. "I'd like to have taken you round the garden, but I must see Crawley, my agent. I've been away from things for too long. He'll be in the lunch too, by the way. You don't mind, do you? You'll be all right?" "Of course," I said. "I shall be quite happy." And he picked up his letters and went out of the room, and I remember thinking this was not how I imagined my first morning. I'd seen us walking together, arms linked to the sea, coming back rather late and tired and happy to a cold lunch, alone, and sitting afterwards under that chestnut tree I could see from the library window. I lingered long over my first breakfast, spinning out the time, and it was not until I saw Firth come in and look at me from behind the service screen that I realized it was after 10 o'clock. I sprang to my feet at once, feeling guilty, and apologized for sitting there too late, and he bowed, saying nothing, very polite, very correct, and I caught a flicker of surprise in his eyes. I wondered if I had said the wrong thing. Perhaps it did not do to apologize. Perhaps it had lowered me in his estimation. I wished I knew what to say, what to do. I wondered if he suspected, as Mrs. Danvers had done, that poise and grace and assurance were not qualities inbred in me, but were things to be acquired, painfully perhaps, and slowly, costing me many bitter moments. As it was, leaving the room, I stumbled, not looking where I was going, catching my foot on the step of the door, and Firth came forward to help me, picking up my handkerchief while Robert, the young footman, who was standing behind the screen, turned away to hide his smile. I heard the murmur of their voices as I crossed the hall, and one of them laughed. Robert, I suppose. Perhaps they were laughing about me. I went upstairs again, to the privacy of my bedroom, but when I opened the door, I found the housemaids in there doing the room. One was sweeping the floor, the other dusting the dressing table. They looked at me in surprise. I quickly went out again. It could not be right then for me to go to my room at that hour in the morning. It was not expected of me. It broke the household routine. I crept downstairs once more, silently, thankfully, of my slippers that made no sound on the stone flags, and so into the library, which was chilly, the windows flung wide open, the fire laid, but not lit. I shut the windows and looked round for a box of matches. I could not find one. I wondered what I should do. I did not like to ring, but the library, so snug and warm last night with the burning logs, was like an ice house now in the early morning. There were matches upstairs in the bedroom, but I did not like to go for them because it would mean disturbing the housemaids at their work. I could not bear their moon faces staring at me again. I decided that when Firth and Robert had left the dining room, I would fetch the matches from the sideboard. I tiptoed out into the hall and listened. They were still clearing. I could hear the sound of voices and the movement of trays. Presently, all was silent. They must have gone through the service doors into the kitchen quarters, so I went across the hall and into the dining room once more. Yes, there was a box of matches on the sideboard. As I expected, I crossed the room quickly and picked them up, and as I did so, Firth came back into the room. I tried to cram the box furtively into my pocket, but I saw him glance at my hand in surprise. "Did you need anything, madam?" he said. "Oh, Firth," I said awkwardly. "I could not find any matches." He at once proffered me another box, handing me the cigarettes too, at the same time. This was another embarrassment, for I did not smoke. "Oh, the fact is," I said, "I felt rather cool in the library. I suppose the weather seems chilly to me, after being abroad, and I thought perhaps I would just put a match to the fire." "The fire in the library is not usually lit until the afternoon, madam," he said. "Mrs. Derwent always used the morning room. There is a good fire in there. Of course, if you wish to have the fire in the library as well, I will give orders for it to be lit." "Oh, no," I said. "I would not dream of it. I will go into the morning room. Thank you, Firth." "You will find writing paper and pens and ink in there, madam," he said. "Mrs. Derwent always did her correspondence and telephoning in the morning room after breakfast. The house telephone is also in there, should you wish to speak with Mrs. Danvers." "Thank you, Firth," I said. I turned away into the hall again, humming a little tune to give me an air of confidence. I could not tell him that I had never seen the morning room, that Maxim had not shown it to me the night before. I knew he was standing in the entrance of the dining room, watching me as I went across the hall, and that I must make some show of knowing my way. There was a door to the left of the great staircase, and I went recklessly towards it, praying in my heart that it would take me to my goal. But when I came to it and opened it, I saw that it was a garden room, a place for odds and ends. There was a table where flowers were done. There were basket chains stacked against the wall, and a couple of mackintoshes too, hanging on a peg. I came out, a little defiantly, glancing across the hall, and saw Firth still standing there. I had not deceived him, though, not for a moment. "You go through the drawing room to the morning room, madam," he said. "Through the door there to your right, this side of the staircase. You go straight through the double drawing room and turn to your left." "Thank you, Firth," I said, humbly, pretending no longer. I went through the long drawing room as he had directed. A lovely room this, beautifully proportioned, looking out upon the lawns down to the sea. The public would see this room, I suppose, and Firth, if he showed them round, would know the history of the pictures on the wall and the period of the furniture. It was beautiful, of course. I knew that, and those chairs and tables probably without price. But for all that I had no wish to linger there. I could not see myself sitting even in those chairs, ever in those chairs. Standing before that carved mantelpiece, throwing books down onto the tables, it had all the formality of a room in a museum, where alcoves were roped off and guarded in a cloak and hat, like the guides in the French chateau. Sorry, my sense of humour's broke. Sat in a chair beside the door. I went through then and turned to the left, and so on to the little morning room I had not seen before. I was glad to see the dogs there, sitting before the fire. Jasper, the younger, came over to me at once, his tail wagging, and thrust his nose into my hand. The old one lifted her muzzle at my approach and gazed in my direction with her blind eyes. When she sniffed the air a moment and found I was not the one she sought, she turned her head away with a grunt and looked steadily into the fire again. Then Jasper left me too, and settled himself by the side of his companion, licking his side. This was their routine. They knew, even as Firth had known, that the library fire was not lit until the afternoon. They came to the morning room from long custom. Somehow, I guessed before going to the window that the room looked out upon the rhododendrons. Why do I keep on saying that word? Yes, there they were, blood red and luscious as I had seen them the evening before. Great bushes of them, massed beneath the open window, encroaching onto the sweep of the drive itself. There was a little clearing, too, between the bushes, like a miniature lawn, the grass a smooth carpet of moss, and in the centre of this, the tiny statue of a naked faun, his pipes to his lips. The crimson rhododendrons, I'll get it eventually, made his background, and the clearing itself was like a little stage where he would dance and play his part. There was no musty smell about this room, as there had been in the library. There were no old, well-worn chairs, no tables littered with magazines and papers, seldom if ever read, but left there from long custom, because Maxim's father, or even his grandfather perhaps, had wished it so. This was a woman's room, graceful, fragile, the room of someone who had chosen every particle of furniture with great care, so that each chair, each vase, each small, infinite small thing should be in harmony with one another, and wish her own personality. It was as though she who had arranged this room had said, "This I will have, and this, taking piece by piece from the treasures in Manderly, each object that pleased her best, ignoring the second-rate, the mediocre, laying her head with sure certain instincts only upon the best." There was no intermingling of style, no confusing of period, and the result was perfection in a strange and startling way, not coldly formal like the drawing-room shown to the public, but vividly alive, having something of the same glow and brilliance as the rhododendrons had massed there beneath the window. And I noticed then that the rhododendrons, no content with forming their theatre on the little lawn outside the window, had been permitted to the room itself. Their great warm faces looked down upon me from the mantelpiece. They floated in a bowl upon the table by the sofa. They stood, lean and graceful, on the writing desk beside the golden candlesticks. The room was filled with them. Even the walls took colour from them, becoming rich and glowing in the morning sun. They were the only flowers in the room, and I wondered if there was some purpose in it, whether the room had been arranged originally with this one end in view, for nowhere else in the house did the rhododendrons obtrude. There were flowers in the dining room, flowers in the library, but orderly and trim, rather in the background. Not like this, not in profusion. I went and sat down at the writing desk, and I thought how strange it was that this room, so lovely and so rich in colour, should be at the same time so businesslike and purposeful. Somehow I should have expected that a room furnished as this was in such exquisite taste, for all the exaggeration of the flowers would be a place of decoration only, languorous, I do have to say that one, I'm sorry, and intimate. But this writing table, beautiful as it was no pretty toy where a woman would scribble little notes, nibbling at the end of a pen, leaving it day after day in carelessness, the blotter a little askew. The pigeonholes were docketed, letters and answered, letters to keep, household, estate, menus, miscellaneous, addresses, each ticket written in that way, scrawling pointed hand that I knew already, and it shocked me, even startled me to recognise it again, for I had not seen it since I had destroyed the page from the book of poems, and I had not thought to see it again. I opened the drawer at hazard, and there was the writing, once more this time, in an open leather book, whose heading, Guests at Manderly, showed at once, divided into weeks and months, what visitors had come and gone, the rooms they had used, the food they had eaten. I turned over the pages and saw that the book was a complete record of a year, so that the hostess, glancing back, would know to the day, almost to the hour, what guest had passed, what night under her roof, and where he had slept, and what she had given him to eat. There was notepaper also in the drawer, thick white sheets for rough writing, and the notepaper of the house, the crest and the address, and visiting cards, ivory, white in little boxes. I took one out and looked at it, unwrapped it from its thin tissue of paper. Mr. M. De Winter. Oh, Mrs. M. De Winter, it said, and in the corner, Manderly. I put it back in the box again and shut the drawer, feeling guilty suddenly and deceitful, as though I was staying in somebody else's house, and my hostess had said to me, "Yes, of course, write letters at my desk," and I had unforgivably, in a stealthy manner, peeped at her correspondence. At any moment she might come back into the room, and she would see me there, sitting before her open drawer, which I had no right to touch. And when the telephone rang suddenly, alarmingly, on the desk in front of me, my heart leapt, and I stared up in terror. Thinking I had been discovered, I took the receiver off with trembling hands and, "Who is it?" I said. "Who do you want?" There was a strange buzzing at the end of the line, and then a voice came low and rather harsh, whether that of a man or a woman I could not tell, and "Mrs. De Winter," it said. "Mrs. De Winter?" "I am afraid you have made a mistake," I said. "Mrs. De Winter has been dead for over a year." I sat there, waiting, staring stupidly into the mouthpiece, and it was not until the name was repeated again, the brush of incredulous slightly raised, I became aware of a rush of colour on my face, that I had blundered irretrievably and could not take back my words. "It's Mrs. Danvers, madam," said the voice. "I am speaking to you on the house telephone." My faux pas was so palpably obvious, so idiotic and unpardonable, that to ignore it would show me to an even greater fool, if possible, than I was already. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Danvers," I said, stammering, my words tumbling over one another. "The telephone startled me. I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't realize the call was for me, and I never noticed I was speaking on the house telephone." "I'm sorry to have disturbed you, madam," she said, and she knows, I thought, she guesses I have been looking through the desk. "I only wondered whether you wished to see me, and whether you approved of the menus for today." "Oh," I said, "oh, I'm sure I do. That is, I'm sure I approve of the menus. Just order what you like, Mrs. Danvers. You needn't bother to ask me." "It would be better, I think, if you read the list," continued the voice. "You will find the menu of the day on the blotter beside you." I searched feverishly about me on the desk, and found at last a sheet of paper I had not noticed before. I glanced hurriedly through it. Curried prawns, roast veal, asparagus, cold chocolate mousse. Was this lunch or dinner? I could not see. Lunch, I suppose. "Yes, Mrs. Danvers," I said. "Very suitable, very nice indeed." "If you wish anything changed, please say so," she answered, "and I will give orders at once. You will notice I have left a blank space beside the sauce for you to mark your preference. I was not sure what sauce you were used to having served with the roast veal. Mrs. De Winter was most particular about her sauces, and I always had to refer to her." "Oh," I said. "Oh, well, let me see, Mrs. Danvers. I hardly know. I think we had better have what you usually have, whatever you think Mrs. De Winter would have ordered." "You have no preference, madam?" "No," I said. "Not really, Mrs. Danvers." "I rather think Mrs. De Winter would have ordered a wine sauce, madam." "We will have the same then, of course," I said. "I'm very sorry I disturbed you while you were writing, madam." "You didn't disturb me at all," I said. "Please don't apologize." "The post leaves at midday, and Robert will come for your letters and stamp them himself," she said. "All you have to do is ring through to him on the telephone, give anything urgent to be sent, and he will give orders for them to be taken to the post office immediately." "Thank you, Mrs. Danvers," I said. I listened for a moment, then she said no more, and then I heard a little click at the end of the telephone, which meant she had replaced the receiver. I did the same. Then I looked down again at the desk, and the notepaper ready for use upon the blotter in front of me, stared, The ticketed pigeonholes and the words upon them, letters unanswered, estate, miscellaneous, were like a reproach to me for my idleness. She who sat here before me had not wasted her time as I was doing. She had reached out of the house for the house telephone and given her orders for the day, swiftly, efficiently, and run her pencil perhaps through an item in the menu that had not pleased her. She had not said, "Yes, Mrs. Danvers, and of course, Mrs. Danvers," as I had done. And then, when she had finished, she began her letters, 5, 6, 7 perhaps to be answered, all written in that same curious slanting hand I know so well. She would tear off sheet after sheet of that smooth white paper, using it extravagantly because of the long strokes she made when she wrote, and at the end of each of her personal letters she put the signature Rebecca, that tall sloping R dwarfing its fellows. I drummed with my fingers on the desk. The pigeonholes were empty now. There were no letters unanswered waiting to be dealt with, no bills to pay that I knew anything about. If I had anything urgent, Mrs. Danvers said, I must telephone through to Robert, and he would give orders for it to be taken to the post. I wonder how many urgent letters Rebecca used to write, and who they were written to. Dressmakers, perhaps. I must have the white satin on Tuesday without fail. Or to her hairdresser. I shall be coming up next Friday and want an appointment at 3 o'clock with Monsieur Antoine? Sorry, I did not say that name. Himself. Shampoo, massage, set and manicure. No letters of that type would be a waste of time. She would have a call put through to London. Firth would do it. Firth would say, I'm speaking for Mrs. De Winter, and went on drumming with my fingers on the desk. I could not think of nobody to write to, only Mrs. Van Hopper, and there was something foolish, rather ironical, in the realization that here I was sitting at my own desk in my own home, with nothing better to do than to write a letter to Mrs. Van Hopper, a woman I disliked, whom I should never see again. I pulled the sheet of notepaper towards me. I took up the narrow slender pen, and with the bright pointed nib, Dear Mrs. Van Hopper, I began, and as I wrote, in halting, laboured fashion, saying I hoped the voyage had been good, and that she had found her daughter better than the weather in New York was fine and warm, I noticed for the first time how cramped and unformed was my own handwriting, without individuality, without style, uneducated even, the writing of an indifferent pupil taught in a second-rate school. So, that's the end of chapter 8. As you can tell, yeah, our protagonist is struggling a little bit with being at Manderly and stuff. I don't know if this is the empath in me, but I have a feeling that she's jealous about his deceased wife from before. What do you guys think? I'm pretty sure that's the case. I'm gonna have a quick drink, guys. Lovely. Let me get everything for the next chapter ready. There we go, chapter 9. What are we doing for time? We're doing pretty good. Let me see how long this next chapter's gonna be. Okay, the next chapter is a little long, so this might be the last chapter. We'll see. We'll see how we're doing for time. If the next chapter after this one isn't too long, then I might also do the one after that as well. But yeah, we'll see. Let me double check how long the next chapter is. So this chapter 9 is quite long. Then the one after that is a little bit long, but not as long. So we'll see. We'll see. It might be too much to do both, but we'll definitely do chapter 9. So here we go. Chapter 9. When I heard the sound of the car in the drive, I got up in a sudden panic, glancing at the clock. For I knew that it meant Beatrice and her husband had arrived. It was only just gone 12. They were much earlier than I expected, and Maxim was not back yet. I wondered if it would be possible to hide, to get out of the windows, into the garden, so that Firth, bringing them to the morning room, would say, Madam must have gone out, and it would seem quite natural. They would take it as a matter of course. The dogs looked up inquiringly as I ran to the window, and Jasper followed me, wagging his tail. The window opened out onto the terrace, and the little grass clearing beyond, but as I prepared to brush past the rhododendrons, the sound of voices came close, and I backed again into the room. They were coming to the house by way of the garden, Firth having told them doubtless that I was in the morning room. I went quickly back into the drawing room, and made for a door near me on the left. It led to a long stone passage, and I ran along it, fully aware of my stupidity, despising myself for the sudden attack of nerves. But I knew I could not face these people, not for a moment anyway. The passage seemed to be taking me to the back regions, and as I turned a corner, coming upon another staircase, I met a servant I had not seen before, a scullery maid perhaps. She carried a mop and pail in her hands. She stared at me in wonder, as though I were a vision, unexpected in this part of the house, and "Good morning," I said, in great confusion, making for the stairway, and "Good morning, madam," she returned, her mouth open, her round eyes inquisitive as I climbed the stairs. They would lead me, I suppose, to the bedrooms, and I could find my suite in the east wing, and sit up there a little while, until I judged it nearly time for lunch, when good manners would compel me to come down again. I must have lost my bearings for passing through a door. Off the head of the stairs, I came to a long corridor that I had not seen before, similar in some ways to the one in the east wing, but broader and darker owing to the panelling of the walls. I hesitated, then turned left, coming upon a broad landing and another staircase. It was very quiet and dark. No one was about. If there had been housemaids here, during the morning, they had finished their work by now and gone downstairs. There was no trace of their presence, no lingering dust smell of carpets lately swept, and I thought, as I stood there, wondering which way to turn, that the silence was unusual, holding something of the same oppression as an empty house does when the owners have gone away. I opened a door at hazard, and found a room in total darkness, no chink of light coming through the closed shutters, while I could see dimly in the centre of the room the outline of furniture swathed in white dust sheets. The room smelled close and stale, the smell of a room seldom if ever used, whose ornaments are herded together in the centre of a bed and left there, covered with a sheet. It might be, too, that the curtain had not been drawn from the window since some preceding summer, and if one crossed there now and pulled them aside, opening the creaking shutters, a dead moth, who had been imprisoned behind them for many months, would fall to the carpet and lie there, beside a forgotten pin and a dried leaf blown there before the windows were closed for the last time. I shut the door softly, and went uncertainly along the corridor, flanked on either side by the doors, all of them closed until I came to a little alcove set in an outside wall, where a broad window gave me light at last. I looked out, and I saw below me the smooth grass lawn stretching to the sea, and the sea itself, bright green with white-tipped crests, whipped by a westerly wind and scudding from the shore. It was closer than I had thought, much closer. It ran, surely, beneath that little knot of trees below the lawns, barely 5 minutes away, and if I listened now, my ear to the window, I could hear the surf breaking on the shores of some little bay I could not see. I knew then I had made the circuit of the house, and was standing in the corridor of the west wing. Yes, Mrs. Danvers was right. You could hear the sea from here. You might imagine, in the winter, it would creep up on to those green lawns and threaten the house itself, for even now, because of the high wind, there was a mist upon the window glass, as though someone had breathed upon it, a mist salt-laden, borne upwards from the sea. A hurrying cloud hid the sun for a moment as I watched, and the sea changed colour instantly, becoming black, and the white crests with them very pitiless, suddenly and cruel, not the gay sparkling sea I had looked on first. Somehow I was glad my rooms were in the east wing. I preferred the rose garden, after all, to the sound of the sea. I went back to the landing then, at the head of the stairs, and as I prepared to go down, one hand upon banister, I heard the door behind me open, and it was Mrs. Danvers. We stared at one another for a moment without speaking, and I could not be certain whether it was anger I read in her eyes or curiosity, for her face became a mask directly as she saw me. Although she said nothing, I felt guilty and ashamed, as though I had been caught trespassing, and I felt the telltale colour come up into my face. "I lost my way," I said. "I was trying to find my room." "You have come to the opposite side of the house," she said. "This is the west wing." "Yes, I know," I said. "Did you go into any of the rooms?" she asked me. "No," I said. "No, I just opened a door. I didn't go in. Everything was dark, covered in dust sheets. I'm sorry. I did not mean to disturb anything. I expect you like to keep all this shut up. If you wish to open up the rooms, I will have it done," she said. "You have only to tell me. The rooms are all furnished and can be used." "Oh, no," I said. "No, I did not mean you to think that." "Perhaps you would like me to show you all over the west wing," she said. I shook my head. "No, I'd rather not," I said. "No, I must go downstairs." I began to walk down the stairs, and she came with me by my side, as though she were a warder, and I in custody. "Any time when you have nothing to do, you have only to ask me, and I will show you the rooms in the west wing," she persisted, making me vaguely uncomfortable. I knew not why. Her insistence struck a chord in my memory, reminding me of a visit to a friend's house. As a child, when the daughter of the house, older than me, took my arm and whispered in my ear, "I know where there is a book, locked in a cupboard, in my mother's bedroom. Shall we go look at it?" I remembered her white, excited face, and her small, beady eyes, and the way she kept pinching my arm. I will have the dust sheets removed, and then you can see the rooms as they looked when they were used," said Mrs. Danvers. "I would have shown you this morning, but I believed you to be writing letters in the morning room. You have only to telephone through the room, you know, when you want me. It would only take a short while to have the rooms in readiness." We had come down the short flight of stairs, and she opened another door, standing aside for me to pass through, her dark eyes questing my face. "It's very kind of you, Mrs. Danvers," I said. "I will let you know some time." We passed out together onto the landing beyond, and I saw we were at the head of the main staircase now, behind the minstrel's gallery. "I wonder how you come to miss your way," she said. "The door through the west wing is very different to this." "I did not come this way," I said. "Then you must have come up the back way, through the stone passage," she said. "Yes," I said, not meeting her eyes. "Yes, I came through a stone passage." She went on, looking at me, as though she expected me to tell her why I left the morning room in sudden panic, going through the back regions, and I felt suddenly that she knew, that she must have watched me, that she had seen me wandering, perhaps in that west wing from the first, her eye to a crack in the door. "Mrs. Lacey and Major Lacey have been here quite some time," she said. "I heard their car drive up shortly after 12. "Oh," I said, "I had not realized that." "Father will have taken them to the morning room," she said. "It must be getting on for 12:30. You know your way now, don't you?" "Yes, Mrs. Danvers," I said, and I went down to the big stairway into the hall, knowing she was standing there above me, her eyes watching me. I knew I must go back now, to the morning room, and meet Maxim's sister and her husband. I could not hide in my bedroom now. As I went into the drawing room, I glanced back. Over my shoulder I saw Mrs. Danvers still standing there at the head of the stairs, like a black sentinel. I stood for a moment outside the morning room with my hand on the door, listening to the hum of voices. Maxim had returned then, while I had been upstairs, bringing his agent with him, I suppose, for it sounded to me as if the room was full of people. I was aware of the same feeling of sick uncertainty I had experienced so often as a child, when summoned to shake hands with visitors, and turning the handle of the door, I blundered in, to be met at once, it seemed, with a sea of faces and a general silence. "Here she is at last," said Maxim. "Where have you been hiding? We were thinking of sending out a search party. Here is Beatrice, and this is Giles, and this is Frank Crawley. Look out, she nearly trod on the dog." Beatrice was tall, broad-shouldered, very handsome, very much like Maxim about the eyes and jaw, but not as smart as I had expected, much tweedier, The sort of person who would nurse dogs through distemper, know about horses, shoot well. She did not kiss me. She shook hands very firmly, looking me straight in the eyes, and then turned to Maxim. Quite different from what I expected. Doesn't answer to your description at all. Everyone laughed, and I joined in, not quite certain if the laugh was against me or not, wondering secretly what it was she had expected, and what had been Maxim's description. And Mrs. Giles, said Maxim, prodding my arm, and Giles stretched out an enormous paw and wrung my hand, squeezing the fingers, limp, genial eyes smiling from behind horn-rimmed glasses. Frank Crawley, said Maxim, and I turned to the agent, a colourless, rather thin man with a prominent Adam's apple, in whose eyes I read relief as he looked upon me. I wondered why, but I had no time to think about that, because Firth had come in, and was offering me sherry, and Beatrice was talking to me again. Maxim tells me you only got back last night. I had not realised that. Oh, of course, we would never have thrust ourselves upon you so soon. Well, what do you think of Manderly? I've scarcely seen anything of it yet, I answered. It's beautiful, of course. She was looking me up and down, and as I had expected, but in a direct, straightforward fashion, not maliciously like Mrs. Danvers, not with unfriendliness. She had a right to judge me. She was Maxim's sister, and Maxim himself came to my side now, putting his arm through mine, giving me confidence. You're looking better, old man, she said to him, her head on one side considering him. You've lost that fine drawn look. Thank goodness. I suppose we've got you to thank for that, nodding at me. I'm always very fit, said Maxim shortly. Never had anything wrong with me in my life. You imagine everyone ill who doesn't look as fat as Giles. Bosh, said Beatrice. You know perfectly well you were a perfect wreck 6 months ago. Gave me the fright of my life when I came and saw you. I thought you were in for a breakdown. Giles, bear me down. Didn't Maxim look perfectly ghastly the last time he came over? And didn't I say he was heading for a breakdown? Well, I must say, old chap, you're looking very... Sorry. You're looking a very different person, said Giles. For a good thing you went away, doesn't he look well, Crawley? I could tell by the tightening of Maxim's muscles under my arm that he was trying to keep his temper. For some reason, the talk about his health was not welcome to him, angered him even, and I thought it tactless of Beatrice to harp upon it in this way, making so big a point of it. Maxim's very sunburnt, I said shyly. It hides a multitude of sins. You should have seen him in Venice, having breakfast on the balcony, trying to get brown on purpose. He thinks it makes him better looking. Everyone laughed, and Mr. Crawley said, It must have been wonderful in Venice, Mrs. Winter, this time of year. And yes, I said, we had really wonderful weather. Only one bad day, wasn't it, Maxim? The conversation drawing away happily from his health, and so to Italy. Safest of subjects, and the blessed topic of fine weather. Conversation was easy now, no longer an effort. Maxim and Giles and Beatrice were discussing the running of Maxim's car, and Mr. Crawley was asking if it were true that there were no more gondolas in the canals now, only motorboats. I don't think he would have cared at all if there had been steamers at anchor in the Grand Canal. He was saying this to help me. It was his contribution to the little effort of steering the talk away from Maxim's health, and I was grateful to him, finding him an ally for all his dull appearance. Jasper wants exercise, said Beatrice, stirring the dog with her foot. He's getting much too fat. He's barely 2 years old. What do you feed him on, Maxim? My dear Beatrice, he has exactly the same routine as your dog, said Maxim. Don't show off and make out you know more about animals than I do. Sorry, I just gotta sit up very quickly. There we go. Dear old boy, how can you pretend to know what Jasper's been fed on when you've been away for a couple of months? Don't tell me Firth walks to the lodge gates with him twice a day. This dog hasn't had a run for weeks. You can tell by the condition of his coat. I'd rather he looked colossal than half-starved like that half-wit dog of yours, said Maxim. Not a very intelligent remark when Lion won 2 firsts in Crufts last February, said Beatrice. The atmosphere was becoming rather strained again. I could tell by the narrow lines of Maxim's mouth. and I wondered if brothers and sisters always sparred like this, making it uncomfortable for those who listened. I wished that Firth would come in and announce lunch, or would we be summoned by a booming gong? I did not know what happened at Manderly. How far away from us are you? I asked, sitting down by Beatrice. Did you have to make a very early start? We're 50 miles away, my dear, in the next country, the other side of Trowchester. The hunting is so much better with us. You must come over and stay when Maxim can spare you. Giles will mount you. I'm afraid I don't hunt, I confessed. I learnt to ride as a child, but very feebly. I don't remember much about it. You must take it up again, she said. You can't possibly live in the country and not ride. You wouldn't know what to do with yourself. Maxim says you paint. That's very nice, of course, but there's no exercise in it, is there? All's very well on a wet day when there's nothing better to do. My dear Beatrice, we're not all such fresh air fiends as you are, said Maxim. I wasn't talking to you, old boy. We all know you're perfectly happy slopping about the Manderly gardens and never breaking out of a slow walk. I'm very fond of walking too, I said swiftly. I'm sure I shall never get tired of rambling about Manderly, and I can bathe too, when it's warmer. My dear, you are an optimist, said Beatrice. I can hardly ever remember bathing here. The water is far too cold, and the beach is shingle. I don't mind that, I said. I love bathing, as long as the currents aren't too strong. Is the bathing safe in the bay? Nobody answered, and I realised suddenly what I had said. My heart thumped, and I felt my cheeks go flaming red. I bent down to stroke Jasper's ear in an agony of confusion. Jasper could do with a swim, and get some of that fat off, said Beatrice, breaking the pause. But you'd find it a bit too much for him in the bay, wouldn't you, Jasper? Good old Jasper, nice old man. We petted the dog together, not looking at one another. I say, I'm getting infernally hungry. What on earth is happening to lunch? Said Maxim. It's only just one now, said Mrs. Crawley. Sorry, the voice. According to the clock on the mantelpiece. That clock was always fast, said Beatrice. It kept perfect time now for months, said Maxim. And at that moment the door opened and Firth announced that luncheon was served. I say, I must have a wash, said Giles, looking at his hands. We all got up and wandered through the drawing room to the great hall in relief. Beatrice and I a little ahead of the men, she taking my arm. Dear old Firth, she said. He always looks exactly the same and makes me feel like a girl again. You know, don't mind me saying so, but you were even younger than I expected. Maxim told me your age, but you're an absolute child. Tell me, are you very much in love with him? I was not prepared for this question, and she must have seen the surprise on my face, for she laughed lightly and squeezed my arm. Don't answer, she said. I can see what you feel. I'm an interfering bore, aren't I? You mustn't mind me. I'm devoted to Maxim, you know. Though we always bicker like cat and dog when we meet. I congratulate you again on his looks. We were all very worried about him this time last year, but of course you know the whole story. We had come to the dining room by now, and she said no more, for the servants were there, and the others had joined us. But as I sat down and unfolded my napkin, I wondered what Beatrice would say. Did she realise that I knew nothing of the preceding year, no details of the tragedy that had happened down there at the bay, that Maxim kept these things to himself, and that I questioned him never? Lunch passed off better than I had dared to hope. There were few arguments, or perhaps Beatrice was exercising tact at last. At any rate, she and Maxim chatted about matters concerning Manderly, her horses, the garden, mutual friends, and Frank Crawley on my left kept up an easy patter with me for which I was grateful, as it required no effort. Giles was more concerned with the food than with the conversation, though now and again he remembered my existence and flung me a remark at hazard. Same cook, I suppose, Maxim, he said, when Robert had offered him the cold souffle for the second time. I always tell Bea, Manderly's the only place left in London where one can get decent cooking. I remember the souffle of old. I think we change cooks periodically, said Maxim, but the standard of cooking remains the same. Mrs. Danvers has all the recipes. She tells them what to do. Amazing woman, that Mrs. Danvers, said Giles, turning to me. Don't you think so? Oh, yes, I said. Mrs. Danvers seems to be a lovely person. A wonderful person. Can't read. She's no oil painting, though, is she? Said Giles, and he roared with laughter. Frank Crawley said nothing, and looking up, I saw Beatrice was watching me. She turned away then, and began talking to Maxim. Do you play any golf at all, Mrs. De Winter? Said Mr. Crawley. No, I'm afraid I don't, I answered, glad the subject had been changed again, when Mrs. Danvers was forgotten, and even though I was no player, and knew nothing of the game, I was prepared to listen to him as long as he pleased. There was something solid and safe and dull about golf. It could not bring us into any difficulties. We had cheese and coffee, and I wondered whether I was supposed to make a move. I kept looking at Maxim, but he gave no sign, and then Giles embarked upon a story rather difficult to follow about digging a car out of a snowdrift. What had started the train of thought I could not tell, and I listened to him politely, nodding my head now again and smiling, aware of Maxim becoming restive at his end of the table. At last he paused, and I caught Maxim's eye. He frowned very slightly and jerked his head towards the door. I got up at once, shaking the table clumsily as I moved my chair and upsetting Giles's glass of port. Oh dear, I said, hovering, wondering what to do, reaching ineffectively for my napkin, but... All right, Firth will deal with it, said Maxim. Don't add to the confusion, Beatrice. Take her out into the garden. She's scarcely seen the place yet. He looked tired, rather jaded. I began to wish none of them had come. They had spoiled our day anyway. It was too much of an effort. Just as we returned, I felt tired too, tired and depressed. Maxim had seemed almost irritable when he suggested we should go into the garden. What a fool I had been, upsetting that glass of port. We went out onto the terrace and walked down to the smooth green lawns. I think it's a pity you came back to Manderly so soon, said Beatrice. It would have been far better to potter around in Italy for 3 or 4 months and then come back in the middle of the summer. Done Maxim a power of good too. Besides, being easier from your point of view, I can't help feeling he's going to be rather a strain here for you at first. Oh, I don't think so, I said. I know I shall come to love Manderly. She did not answer, and we strolled backwards and forwards on the lawns. Tell me a bit about yourself, she said at last. What was it you were doing in the south of France? Living with some appalling American woman, Maxim said. I explained about Mrs. Van Hop and what had led to it, and she seemed sympathetic but a little vague, as though she was thinking of something else. Yes, she said when I paused. It all happened very suddenly, as you say, but of course we were all delighted, my dear, and I do hope you will be happy. Thank you, Beatrice, I said. Thank you very much. I wondered why she said she hoped we would be happy, instead of saying she knew we would be. She was kind, she was sincere. I liked her very much, but there was a tiny doubt in her voice that made me afraid. What Maxim wrote and told me, she went on, taking my arm, and he said that he had discovered you in the south of France, and you were very young, very pretty. I must admit it gave me a bit of a shock. Of course we all expected a social butterfly, very modern and placid for a painter, the sort of the girl you expected to meet in all those sorts of places. When he came into the morning room before lunch, you could have knocked me down with a feather. She laughed, and I laughed with her, but she did not say whether or not she was disappointed in my appearance or relieved. Poor Maxim, she said. He went through a ghastly time, and let's hope you have made him forget about it. Of course he adores Manderly. Part of me wanted her to continue her train of thought, to tell me more of the past, naturally and easily like this, and something else, way back in my mind, did not want to know, did not want to hear. We are not a bit alike, you know, she said. Our characters are poles apart. I show everything on my face, whether I like people or not, whether I am angry or pleased. There's no reserve about me. Maxim is entirely different, very quiet, very reserved. You never know what's going on in that funny mind of his. I lose my temper over the slightest provocation. Provocation? Yeah, okay. Flare up and then it's all over. Maxim loses his temper once or twice in a year, and when he does, my God, he does lose it. And I don't suppose he ever will with you. I should think you are a placid little thing. She smiled and pinched my arm, and I thought about being placid. How quiet and comfortable it sounded. Someone with knitting on her lap, with calm and ruffled brow, someone who was never anxious, never tortured by doubt and indecision, someone who never stood as I did, hopeful, eager, frightened, tearing at bitten nails, uncertain which way to go, what star to follow. "You won't mind me saying so, will you?" she went on, "but I think you ought to do something to your hair. Why don't you have it waved? It's so very lanky, isn't it? Like that. Must look awful under a hat. Why don't you sweep it back up behind your ears?" I did so obediently, and waited for her approval. She looked at me critically, her head on one side. "No," she said. "No, I think that's worse. It's too severe. It doesn't suit you. No, all you need is a wave, just to pinch it up. I never have cared for that Joan of Arc business, or whatever they call it. What does Maxim say? Does he think it suits you?" "I don't know," he said. Oh, I said. "He's never mentioned it." "Oh well," she said. "Perhaps he likes it. Don't go by me. Tell me, did you get any clothes in London or Paris?" "No," I said. "We had no time. Maxim was anxious to get home, and I can always send for catalogues." "I can tell by the way you dress you don't care a hoot what you wear," she said. I glanced at my flannel skirt apologetically. "I do," I said. "I'm very fond of nice things. I've never had much money to spend on clothes up until now." "I wonder Maxim did not stay a week or so in London and get you something decent to wear," she said. "I must say, I think it's rather selfish of him. So unlike him, too. He's generally so particular." "Is he?" I said. "He's never seemed particular to me." "I don't think he notices what I wear at all. I don't think he minds." "Oh," she said. "Oh, well, he must have changed then." She looked away from me and whistled to Jasper, her hands in her pockets, and then stared up at the house above us. "You're not used to using the west wing, then?" she said. "No," I said. "No, we have the suite in the east wing. It's all been done up." "Has it?" she said. "I didn't know that. I wonder why." "It was Maxim's idea," I said. "He seems to prefer it." She said nothing. She went on looking at the windows and whistling. "How'd you get on with Mrs. Danvers?" she said suddenly. I bent down and began patting Jasper's head and stroking his ears. "I have not seen very much of her," I said. "She scares me a little. I have never seen anyone quite like her before." "I don't suppose you have," said Beatrice. Jasper looked up at me with great eyes, humble, rather self-conscious. I kissed the top of his silken head and put my hand over his black nose. "There's no need to be frightened of her," said Beatrice, "and don't let her see it whatever you do. Of course I've never had anything to do with her, and I don't think I ever want to either. However, she's always been very civil to me." I went on patting Jasper's head. "Does she seem friendly?" said Beatrice. "No," I said. "No, not very." Beatrice began whistling again, and she rubbed Jasper's head with her foot. "I shouldn't have had more to do with her than you can help," she said. "No," I said. "She runs the house very efficiently. There's no need for me to interfere." "Oh, I don't suppose she'd mind that," said Beatrice. That was what Maxim had said the evening before, and I thought it odd that they should both have the same opinion. I should have imagined that interference was the only thing Mrs. Danvers did not want. "I dare say she will get over it over time," said Beatrice, "but it does make many things rather unpleasant for you at first. Of course she's insanely jealous. I was afraid she would be." "Why?" I asked, looking up at her. "Why should she be jealous? Maxim does not seem to be particularly fond of her." "My dear child, it's not Maxim she's thinking of," said Beatrice. "I think she respects him and all that, but nothing more very much." "No, you see," she paused, frowning a little, looking at me uncertainly. "She resents yours being here at all. That's the trouble." "Why?" I said. "Why should she resent me?" "I thought you knew," said Beatrice. "I thought Maxim would have told you. She simply adored Rebecca." "Oh," I said. "Oh, I see." We both went on patting and stroking Jasper, who, unaccustomed to such attention, rolled over on his back in ecstasy. "How are the men?" said Beatrice. "Let's have some chairs out and sit under the chestnut. How fat Giles is getting. He looks quite repulsive beside Maxim. I suppose Frank will go back to the office. What a dull creature he is. Never has anything interesting to say. Well, all of you, what have you been discussing? Pulling the world to bits, I suppose." She laughed, and the others strolled towards us as we stood about. Giles threw a twig for Jasper to receive. We all looked at Jasper. Mr. Crawley looked at his watch.
"I must be off," he said. "Thank you very much for the lunch, Mrs. De Winter."
"You must come often," I said, shaking hands. I wondered if the others would go too. I was not sure whether they had just come over for lunch or to spend the day. I hoped they would go. I wanted to be alone with Maxim again, and that it would be like we were in Italy. We all went and sat down under the chestnut tree. Robert brought out chairs and rugs. Giles lay down on his back and tipped his hat over his eyes. After a while he began to snore, his mouth open. "Ah, shut up, Giles," said Beatrice.
"Not asleep," he muttered,
opening his eyes and shutting them again. I thought him unattractive. I wondered why Beatrice had married him. She could never have been in love with him. Perhaps that was what she was thinking about me. I caught her eye upon me now, and again, puzzled and reflective, as though she had been saying to herself, "What on earth does Maxim see in her?" But kind in the same time, not unfriendly. They were talking about their grandmother.
"We must go over and see the old lady," Maxim was saying.
"And she's getting gaga." "She's getting gaga." "She's getting gaga," said Beatrice. "Drops food all down her chin, poor darling." I listened to both of them, leaning against Maxim's arms, rubbing my chin on his sleeve. He stroked my hand absently, not thinking, talking to Beatrice. That's what I do to Jasper, I thought. I'm being like Jasper now, leaning against him. He pats me now and again when he remembers, and I'm pleased. I get close to him for a moment. He likes me in the way I like Jasper. The wind had dropped. The afternoon was drowsy, peaceful. The grass had been new mown. It smelt sweet and rich, like summer. A bee droned above Giles's head, and he flicked at it with his hat. Jasper sloped in to join us too, warm in the sun, his tongue lolling from his mouth. He flopped beside me and began licking his side, his large eyes apologetic. The sun shone over the mullioned windows of the house, and I could see the green lawns and the terrace reflected in them. Smoke curled thinly from one another in the nearby chimneys, and I wondered if the library fire had been lit, according to routine. A thrush flew across the lawn to the magnolia tree outside the dining room window. I could smell the faint, soft magnolia scent as I sat there on the lawn. Everything was quiet and still, very distant now. Came the washing of the sea in the bay below. The tide must have gone out. The bee droned over us again, pausing to taste the chestnut blossom above our heads. This is what I always imagined, I thought. This is how I hoped it would be, living at Manderly. I wanted to go on sitting there, not talking, not listening to the others, keeping the moment precious for all time, because we were peaceful, all of us. We were content and drowsy even as the bee who droned above our heads. In a little while it would be different. There would come tomorrow, and the next day, and another year, and we would be changed perhaps, never sitting quite like this again. Some of us would go away, or suffer, or die. The future stretched away in front of us, unknown, unseen, not perhaps what we wanted, not what we planned. This moment was safe though. This could not be touched. Here we sat together, Maxim and I, hand in hand, and the past and the future mattered not at all. This was secure. This funny fragment of time he would never remember, never think about again. He would not hold it sacred. He was talking about cutting away some of the undergrowth in the drive, and Beatrice agreed, interrupting with some suggestion of her own, and throwing a piece of grass at Giles at the same time. For them it was just after lunch, 3:15, on a haphazard afternoon, like any hour, like any day. They did not want to hold it close, imprisoned and secure, as I did. They were not afraid. "Well, I suppose we ought to be off," said Beatrice, brushing the grass from her skirt. "I don't want to be late. We've got the Cartwrights dining."
"How old is Vera?" asked Maxim.
"Oh, same as ever. Always talking about her health. He's getting very old. They're sure to ask all about you both."
"Give them my love," said Maxim.
We got up. Giles shook the dust off his hat. Maxim yawned and stretched. The sun went in. I looked up at the sky. It had changed already, a mackerel sky. Little clouds scurrying in formation, line upon line.
"Wind's backing," said Maxim. "I hope we don't run into the rain," said Giles.
"I'm afraid you've had the best of the day," said Beatrice. We wandered slowly towards the drive and the waiting car.
"You haven't seen what's been done in the east wing," said Maxim.
"Come upstairs," I suggested. "It won't take a minute." We went up into the hall, and up We went into the hall and up the big staircase, the men following behind. It seemed strange that Beatrice had lived here for so many years. She must have run down these same stairs as a little girl, with her nurse. She had been born here, bred here. She knew it all. She belonged here more than I should ever do. She must have many memories locked inside her heart. I wondered if she ever thought about the days that were gone, ever remembered the lanky pigtailed child that she had once been, so different from the woman she had become, 45 now, vigorous and settled in her ways, another person. We came to the rooms, and Giles, stooping under the low doorway, said, "How very jolly. This is a great improvement, isn't it, Bee? And I say, old boy, you have spread yourself." "I say, old boy, you have spread yourself," said Beatrice. "New curtains, new beds, new everything. You remember, Giles, we had this room that time you were laid with your leg. It was very dingy then. Of course, Mother had never had much idea of comfort. And then, you never put people here, did you, Maxim? Except when there was an overflow. The bachelors were always dumped here. Well, it's charming, I must say. Looks over the rose garden, too, which was always an advantage. May I powder my nose?" The men went downstairs, and Beatrice peered in the mirror. Did old Danvers do this for all you? Do all this for you? There we go. Oh my god, my model. Why does he keep doing that? She said. "Yes," I said. "I think she's done it very well." "So she should, with all her training," said Beatrice. "I wonder what on earth it cost. A pretty packet, I bet. Did you ask?" "No, I'm afraid I did not," I said. "I didn't suppose it worried Mrs. Danvers," said Beatrice. "Do you mind if I use your comb? These are nice brushes. Wedding present?" Maxim gave them to me. I like them. We must give you something, of course. What do you want?" "Oh, I don't really know. You mustn't bother," I said. "Oh, my dear, don't be absurd. I'm not one to grudge you a present, even though we weren't asked at your wedding." "Oh, even though we weren't asked to your wedding?" "I hope you do not mind about that. Maxim wanted it to be abroad." "Of course not. Very sensible for you both. After all, it wasn't as though—" She stopped in the middle of a sentence and dropped her bag. "Damn, have I broken the catch? No, all is well. What was I saying? I can't remember. Oh, yes, wedding presents. We must think of something. You probably don't care for jewellery." I did not answer. "It's so different from the ordinary young couple," she said. "The daughter of a friend of mine got married the other day, and of course they were starting off in the usual way, with linen and coffee sets and dining room chairs and all that. I gave rather a nice standard lamp. Cost me $5 at HARASS. If you do go up to London to buy clothes, mind you, go to my woman, Madame Carrosse. She has damn good taste, and she doesn't rock up." She got up from the dressing table and pulled at her skirt. "Do you suppose you will have a lot of people down?" she said. "I don't know. Maxim hasn't said." "Funny old boy. One never quite knows of him. At one time one could not get a bed in the house. The place would be chock-a-block. I can't somehow see you—" She stopped abruptly and patted my arm. "Oh, well," she said, "we'll see. It's a pity you don't ride or shoot. You miss such a lot. You don't sail by any chance, do you?" "No," I said. "Thank God for that," she said. She went to the door, and I followed her down the corridor. "Come see us if you feel like it," she said. "I always expect people to ask themselves. Life is too short to send out invitations." "Thank you very much," I said. We came to the head of the stairs, looking down upon the hall. The men were standing on the steps outside. "Come on, Bee." "Come on," was that American? "Come on, Bee," shouted Giles. "I've got a spot of rains we must put on our cover. Maxim says the glass is falling." Beatrice took my hand and, bending down, gave me a swift peck on the cheek. "Goodbye," she said. "Forgive me if I asked you a lot of rude questions, my dear, and said all sorts of things I shouldn't. Tact never was my strong point, as Maxim would tell you. And, as I told you before, you're not a bit what I expected." She looked at me direct, her lips pursed in a whistle, and then took a cigarette from her bag and flashed her lighter. "You see," she said, snapping the top and walking down the stairs, "you are so very different from Rebecca." And we came out onto the steps and found the sun had gone behind the bank of cloud. A little thin rain was falling, and Robert was hurrying across the lawn to bring the chairs. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 9, everyone. So, Yeah, looking at the time, I don't think we will be able to do chapter 10 today. But it's okay, we can just do it next time. Yay! But yeah, we finally got to Manderly, and it looks like we've learned quite a lot about the staff there and such. And we've also now met some of Maxim's relatives, which is interesting. I think the sister seems quite nice, but also I think very opinionated. Like, not necessarily in a bad way, just like I feel like we probably wouldn't share the same opinions, if you know what I mean. But she still seems nice. I think if I knew her, like, if she was a real person, I'd probably like her. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little reading ASMR. It's nice to do it again. Yay! I don't know if you guys saw, but I've already posted a couple waiting rooms for next week. I didn't have time to put out all of them, so I'll put out the next two and then post my schedule after the stream's done. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the reading and such, and I hope you guys have a nice morning, day, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is for you when you're watching this or listening. Yeah, thank you again for listening and watching my stream, and I'll see you guys next week. I think on Tuesday. Yeah, first stream's gonna be on Tuesday, so I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Bye guys, bye bye bye. See you on Tuesday. Bye.